Right, okay, welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at the website yourmorals.org. This was a website, an educational website set up to study morals and the way people think across a diverse group of folks. So first, giving credit where credit is due, this was a site set up by a group of social psychologists who wanted to study morality. And I'll scroll through here just so that you can see all the people that were involved. And I'm not going to actually read through all of this, but because it would take a really long time. But you can see all the folks here that were involved in this website. So let's get into it. So this site has, as you can see, a whole bunch of different surveys and different questionnaires you can take to determine. There has different moral questions. I think, though, the one that we're going to start with is this one, the Moral Foundations Questionnaire. It says, why do you care about some virtues and issues more than others? This survey gives you a broad overview of your morals. So let's jump into it. Okay, it tells us a little bit about who started it, it says how long it's going to take, and that they're not going to use my information for anything. It's fine, we agree. Okay, first one. So it says, when you decide whether something is right or wrong, to what extent are the following considerations relevant to your thinking? The scale is not at all relevant or extremely relevant. Okay, so let's see. Uh, whether or not someone conformed to the traditions of society. I'd say this isn't really relevant to me. As I said previously, I value freedom pretty highly, so I think to me it's not too important if someone conforms to traditions. Whether or not someone suffered emotionally, I think that's somewhat relevant. I think emotional suffering is something we know, like things like PTSD and stuff like that, that emotionally, there can be things that are emotionally scarring and can affect you for years after. Let's see, whether or not someone showed a lack of loyalty. I would say loyalty is important. Um, I don't know. I'm going to go with slightly relevant. I don't know if it's not as big of a deal for me. I don't think. So whether or not someone did something disgusting. Well, so disgust is a weird thing. I don't think that disgust is somewhat subjective. I think so. I'm going to have to go with only slightly relevant. Whether or not someone acted unfairly. I would say that's relevant. Being fair in a lot of situations I think is really important. So let's see. Whether or not someone was denied his or her rights, that's extremely relevant to me. Whether or not someone was cruel, pretty relevant. I think this difference is, I'm going to go back and talk about this for a second. So this question asks about fairness and this one asks about cruelty. And to me, I think there's a big difference between those two because to me, fairness is something I wouldn't necessarily say subjective, but I think that fairness is not as there's not if someone's unfair, I don't think that you can make the argument that their intention wasn't to be unfair. Whereas with cruelty, I feel if someone is being cruel, there's more of an intent and more of a purposefulness to being cruel. Whether or not someone violated standards of purity and decency, I'd say not very relevant. Purity and decency, I think could cover a wide variety of things. So I think overall, of all the things that could be considered pure or decent, I'm going to go with not too relevant. Whether or not someone's action showed love for his or her country. I'm gonna have to say only somewhat relevant. I think obviously patriotism is a good thing, but I don't think that you need to be overly patriotic. I think some patriotism is good, whereas then there's being almost like a religious zealot when it comes to it. So they can take it with me, take it to the extreme. Whether or not someone did something to betray his or her group. Now, this is an interesting one because you could group it as a very broad term. You could say group as in maybe you're in a book club and you do something to betray them. Is that as bad as, say, being a part of a broader group of, you could say, group of somehow, yeah, maybe a group of your gender or race, or you could call that, some people I know will say something is someone has betrayed their race, their gender, whatever. But I do think this is somewhat relevant. whether or not someone cared for someone weak or vulnerable. I'm going to say this is somewhat relevant because weak or vulnerable can be, there's a lot there, and when it comes to, say, your family, definitely would be extremely relevant. When it comes to people that you're not related to or someone you don't know, you can you can make the argument that it's not as important to that person. If you're not related to the person or don't know them personally, someone who's if someone being cared for that's weak or vulnerable may not be as important to you. So I'm going to say it's only somewhat relevant. Whether or not some people were treated differently than others. Now, this is a tough one because big part of conversations these days is about equality, and that's treating people differently, or inequality would be that. So I'm going to say this is very relevant, and the only reason I'm not saying extremely is because treating people differently has a very wide variety of things. So it covers a wide variety. So if I were married, I would treat my wife differently than some, random woman approached me on the street. Not that I'm saying I would treat this person poorly, but I would treat them differently. I would give, somebody who is a significant other or a spouse, you're going to treat them differently. You're going to give them special consideration that you wouldn't give someone else. So that is technically treating them differently, but there's a very good reason you have a much deeper connection to that person. So, which is why that's why I'm not checking off extremely relevant for this one, because you're going to treat people differently naturally. You might not make a conscious effort to, but you are going to. It's going to be very hard to break yourself and to not do that. So while it is important that you treat people fairly or that people are treated differently, I can't go all the way because I think just some inequality in the way you treat people is just going to happen naturally. This next one says whether or not an action caused chaos or disorder. So this is another one. Chaos or disorder is something, again, very broad. Um, there can be chaos, say, large-scale chaos, or you can do something that, say, causes chaos in just your immediate family. I'm going to say this is slightly relevant to me, though, because of how broad that topic is with those words. So, next one here, whether or not someone showed a lack of respect for authority. This is also only somewhat relevant to me because authority can be anything. Now, authority can be something, a brutal dictator technically has authority, but if they're doing something inhumane and you have no respect for them, I think in certain cases you can lack respect for authority when it's appropriate. But at other times, say, disrespecting your parents have authority over you, and maybe trying to say, get their child to go to bed at a reasonable time, and their child doesn't want to go to bed. That's not respecting the authority of their parents, but that in that case they're trying to help you. So I think it's only some role. I think sometimes you show disrespect for authority when authority is being oppressive or, say, unfair or immoral. But most of the time you want to have respect for them. In some cases, whether or not someone acted in a way that God would approve of. I'm going to go. This is not very relevant to me because especially when they refer to God this way, it could be taken that they're referring to the way that someone who's Christian thinks of God, which would be different than the way somebody else of a different religion would. So that's why it's not relevant to me because people's interpretations of their religion and of a God are very, very different, and you're going to have a varying degree of importance for it. So to me personally, though, not very important. Whether or not someone was good at math, I am terrible at math, not relevant at all. All right, part two. Please read the following sentences and indicate level of agreement or disagreement. Okay. One of the worst things a person could do is hurt a defenseless animal. Not really agree. I definitely agree. I think cruelty to animals, cruelty, and not just cruelty to animals, cruelty to living things of a lower natural status than you, where predator, prey, that type of thing, and especially if it's as a person. So we as people, having the mental capacity to reason and understand pain and suffering, I think have an obligation not to abuse things that are lower than us evolutionarily or naturally, um, because we know better. In those cases, be it cruelty to animals, we know better than to do that. Chastity is an important and valuable virtue. I'm going to mildly disagree. I think chastity, I think that's something that each person values differently, and it can mean different things to different people. And for me, it's not something I'm really too concerned with. If I were a soldier and disagreed with my commanding officer's orders, I would obey anyway because that's my duty. Now, this is interesting because I know for a fact that under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, you are required to obey the orders of a commanding officer, provided they are lawful. Your commanding officer, if your commanding officer asks you to do something that is unlawful, asks you to break the law, you do not have to follow them. But other than that, you have to. So, I'm going to say moderately agree here for that reason alone. That even if you disagree with them, provided they're lawful, it is your duty to obey them. But if they're unlawful, it's your duty to actually not obey them. So, in this case, that's why I'm only going to say moderately instead of strongly, because you do have some leeway, and there are cases where you wouldn't obey them. People should be loyal to their family members, even when they've done something wrong. I strongly agree to this one, because at the end of the day, your family is your last line of defense. It's all you have. If you can lose all your friends, you can lose your job, you can lose everything. But your family, they're related to you directly, and they're blood related to you. And I think no matter what your family members do, if they come to you in a time of need, I do think it is right to be loyal to them and help them out, regardless of what they did. Obviously, if they're asking you to break the law with them, no. But if they're asking you for help, then you should help them if you can. Justice is the most important requirement for a society. Ooh, so justice is very important, but my only pause to this is justice can be taken differently. So if if you lived in a society where the majority of people thought it was just to commit murder, well then that would be justice to them. When murder and causing harm, something I think is morally wrong. So I'm going to say only slightly agree. See, compassion for those who are suffering is the most crucial virtue. I moderately agree. I think that is important. It's better to do good than to do bad. I strongly agree. I would call some acts wrong on the grounds they're unnatural. Well, I want to say only slightly disagree because this is, again, very, very broad. So I would have to, in order to say something is wrong because it's unnatural, I would have to know exactly what the act was. So that's why I'm saying slightly disagree. Respect for authority is something all children need to learn. Only slightly agree based on respect for authority that I said earlier. I feel kind of the same way. Many of them each have different roles to play in society. This is hard. I'm going to say moderately disagree. I think in terms of society, they can play the same kind of roles. But obviously, like women can bear children, so they have a little bit of a different role just through sheer biology. But moderately. I'm proud of my country's history. I slightly disagree. There are things, now granted, I think every person, no matter what country you're from, is going to be somewhere on these left three here. Most countries have done something that you're not too proud of. It's more important to be a team player than to express yourself. I'm going to slightly disagree. I think that it's important for people to be individuals, but also in certain cases, being a team player. I think both are important. I'm going to slightly disagree more towards the expressing yourself. I think it's morally wrong that rich children inherit a lot of money while poor children inherit nothing. I wouldn't say it's morally wrong. Is it messed up sometimes? Yes, but morally, it's not wrong. So I'm going to have to go with moderately disagree. Unfortunately, sometimes there are circumstances that are out of your control, and yes, it may not be fun, it may not be the best scenario, but sometimes these things happen. It can never be right to kill a human being. I'm gonna go with slightly agree. Um, there are difficult choices to be made, and maybe that'll be a whole other video talking about crime and punishment. Maybe that'll be something. But now we're just gonna go with a slightly agree rather than strongly agree. Maybe a way too long topic to include here. So people should not do things that are disgusting, even if no one is harmed. I'm going to moderately disagree. Let's see. When the government makes laws, the number one principle should be ensuring that everyone is treated fairly. Now, when a government makes laws, I'd say moderately agree. A government entity should make sure that they're fair. So then there are some final questions. We're going to say yes. Current relationship status. We're single. How I describe my ethnicity. Very plain. Or is it for postal coding? I guess we will. And then see the results. Oh, okay, so there's a lot. So I'm not going to go through and read all of it because I think this is going to get long. But let's see what we got. So it's a measure of 5 foundations of morality. So let's see what we got. So my score is green. Then there's people who identify as liberal, they're in blue. And the people who identify as conservatives are in red. And the score is 0, meaning the lowest. And you completely reject. The 5, which is the highest possible, you strongly endorse it. So let's see what we get here. So when it comes to harm, I was right there, 3.5. People who were more liberal were 3.7, so they more so agreed, and the conservatives a little lower. So then fairness, so whether fairness was important to me. So notice how they're all very close in the 3. They're all in the 3, same here. So whether you were liberal, conservative, or me, which I guess I tend to say I'm in the middle. There I am, in the middle again. Obviously, a little more important to people who identify as liberal, and a little less important, but still right there in that 3 range. So then when we talk about loyalty, interestingly enough, loyalty much higher for people who are conservative, very low for people who are liberal, or much lower. And then for me, but notice again, even in these areas, I do align more with liberals and these two. In terms of harm and fairness, everyone's in the 3s, very, very close. Whereas here, there's actually a difference, a bigger difference of 3 to in the 2s. Authority, another interesting one. Here's where I am, here's where people are liberal, here's where conservatives are. Conservatives could have been higher. I mean, there are a whole number difference between both of these. That's kind of where your disparity is. Now, purity, I think, is really interesting because here there's a huge difference between. Notice how barely any difference between me and the average, I guess you would say, liberal that have taken these. But then for someone conservative, very high on that score, or much higher, bigger disparity. So I think these results are pretty interesting just because you can see when it comes to big deal, like harm is a really big deal. It's hard to argue that harm is not being committed. If you see someone being hurt, that's definitely harmful. And here we have the 3 different, me plus liberal conservative, very close. Fairness, very close. Everyone likes being treated fairly, I guess, right? Then when you start getting to loyalty, authority, and purity, things that are, I think, a little more ambiguous, things you can determine as being loyal, or you can determine authority, and you can determine purity. Fairness and harm, I think, are a little more universal. But anyway, so really interesting results. I really liked that. Maybe I think I'm going to maybe it'll be a whole series where I take a bunch of other ones because there were a lot that are pretty interesting. Definitely looking at some couple others. Anyway, so let me know what you think. Maybe that's cool. Hopefully you got something from it. I know I definitely did. I'll see you next time.